Hey, 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 everyone. Welcome back to Strange Mind 6. I'm your host, Ruby, and today we're going to be getting back into Beware the Claws That Catch Alice by Christina Henry. Where we last left off, they just encountered the bodies on the streets, and the girls were taken safely with Pipkin. So they made it safely out. Or so we know of. And they just made it to Heathtown, from where Hatcher's from. So without further ado, my dear friends, grab a snack, grab a drink, or sit back and relax. And let's get to this. Chapter 17. He pointed to one of the shanties. It looked no different from the others to Alice, except perhaps a bit more run down. The single window was boarded, no smoke emitted from the small chimney in back as it did from some of the others. Hatcher walked to the door. What if somebody lives there now? Alice said. She didn't like the look on his face. He was like a man in a trance, gone to some time far away from the one they were in, seeing things that weren't there anymore. Nobody would live here, he said softly. It's a haunted place. Can't you feel it? Her ghost always waits for me. He pushed the door open and went inside. Alice quickly glanced up and down the street, then followed. Inside were a few broken sticks of furniture and the evidence of fires recently set in the small fireplace. Likely young boys using the shanty as a place to smoke cigarettes and drink stolen ale, and tell each other stories of the murderer who used to live here. Hatcher paused in the center of the room, turning in a slow circle. The wood floor under his feet had a few rusty stains on it, stains that might have been the last remains of one bloody night. She used to spin cloth there. She was terrible at it. She wasn't a very good cook either, but we managed. I ate burnt toast every day and told her it was delicious. She kept the house very clean, took pride in the way things shone and gleamed because she'd never had anything of her own before, and our bed was there, behind a curtain. I liked to watch her in the early morning, watching her breathe, rise and fall, and know that she was mine. Then she would open those blue eyes and smile, soft and sleepy, and she would love me. She loved me. She loved me, and I failed her. He fell to his knees then and wept. Alice didn't know what to do. She felt she shouldn't intrude here, where Hattie's ghost lingered, where he stopped being Nicholas and became Hatcher instead. She realized that part of her was a bit envious of Hatcher. Yes, he had lost his love and his child in the most terrible way possible, but he had known happiness too. He had lived as an adult in the adult world, and Alice had never had that. You might have it someday with him, she thought. Yes, she might. They might someday live in a cottage by a lake. From the fog and the blood away from the fog and the blood and all the magicians. They might, but there was a long road before them. Alice waited, and after a time, Hatcher stood. "I'm ready now," he said. When he faced her again, she knew Nicholas was gone forever. He'd said goodbye to the man here, and to Hattie, and to the last threads that tethered him to his old life. He was Hatcher now, and forever. "I know where to find the rabbit," he said. They felt more confident. They left the shanty and returned to the street. Alice might have imagined it, but she thought there was a cool breeze around her neck as they departed. She felt a pulse of warmth on her chest and realized the rose pendant that Bess had given her was glowing. "I forgot about this," Alice said. "Bess gave you that for a reason. I think it must have to do with magic," Alice said. "I don't feel any different, though. Now that I know I'm a magician, I don't feel as though I have lots of power that could come out of my fingertips." She thought of the wish-granting genie in the stories, of the desert, and all of the wonders he could create. Could she do the same thing like that? A wish has power. According to Hatcher, she had set the roses on fire in Cheshire's maze. She'd been terrified, had only wanted to escape the strangling roses. Could she do the same thing again? "I wonder if Cheshire would teach you how to use your magic," Hatcher said. "I don't want lessons from Cheshire," Alice said firmly. She did not want anything from Cheshire. Despite his occasional assistance, she did not like him. "You need a guide, someone who can help you with your power, and the only magicians we know are the caterpillar, Cheshire, and the rabbit." "There are more out there somewhere," Alice said. "They were driven from the city, but they live. The caterpillar said, 'We recognize our own.' When we leave the city, we're sure to encounter some." She did not say that she was a little afraid of being a magician and what she might discover inside. The two most difficult tasks were being for them now, and she did not wish to get distracted. Though magic might be helpful, she thought. It might be, but then it might not be. The Jabberwocky was the essence of the most evil magician who had ever lived. The other magicians in the city were horrible men. Perhaps magic only corrupted. Alice did not want that. She was only just discovering who she was, and she wished to stay Alice. The shanties of Heathtown gradually gave way to the taller buildings they'd seen in the rest of the city. Hatcher moved like a hunter now, a creature on the scent of prey. He did not hesitate. He knew where the rabbit was, and Hatcher would drive him into the ground. Alice was not afraid. She felt she ought to be, that it might keep her alive. She simply couldn't feel afraid. They had seen so much already. All the horror and blood and monsters and fear crystallized to a fine, thin shard inside her, harder than diamonds. What was one more monster in the face of so many? Hatcher, Alice said, had you thought about what we've done, killing the caterpillar and the walrus? We didn't kill the walrus, Hatcher said. We helped, at any rate. That is not the point. The point is that we've made empty places where men of power used to be. What will happen now? Someone will take their place, Hatcher said. Likely more than one person for each territory. The caterpillar and the walrus were strong men, with large chunks of the city in their pockets. Will it be better under someone new? Alice asked. She hoped so. She hoped that she had not killed the caterpillar only to have an identical man spring from the same place, like in the story where the hero kept cutting the heads off a monster, only to have more emerge. Maybe, Hatcher said. No matter who is in charge, the people of the city will go on living the best they can. They have no other choice. This was true. Alice reflected. People like Nell and Harry, and even poor stupid Dolly, they built something in the city. A tavern, a bookshop, a potato cart, and they worked at it day after day because they hoped. They saw all the misery around them. They knew the risks they took just in climbing from their beds each day. But they still hoped for success, happiness, a better future. There was no other choice. If they tried to escape the old city, they would be caught by the soldiers who patrolled the new city and sent back. No one was allowed to leave. No one. Why can't we leave the city, Hatcher? Alice asked. Because the ministers and the bosses need someone to use, to keep down, Hatcher said. Do you think anyone would choose to stay here? No, Alice said. I don't think they would. So, all the big men would be sitting in their houses with no money to count and no one to kick, Hatcher said. Do you know what they'd do then? They'd go out and find another city. And this time, they'd make sure everyone stayed. They would find a way. Men like that need someone's neck under their boot, or they don't feel right about themselves. I hope it's beautiful, Alice said. Outside the city, I mean. She was thinking of the girls who'd escaped with Pipkin, and hoped that they ran in the grass with bare feet, laughing in the sun. She wanted a promise of joy for someone, even if she could not have it for herself. There was some activity on the streets now, not like it would be on a normal day, a no Jabberwock day, but Alice and Hatcher did pass the occasional person going about furtive business. No one respectable would be about. Alice wondered where the Jabberwocky was now, and what the city leaders would do if the monster slaughtered every living soul. Escape in their airship, most likely, Alice muttered. When she was a child, she thought the ministers were the most wonderful people in the world. Giving Day proved that. They gave these lovely gifts to all the children of the city, and patted those children on the head and told them they would grow up to be good citizens. Alice had not realized that they were only interested in clean, wealthy children from the new city. She had not realized that men in power were only interested in power and not good deeds. She'd learned much since escaping from the hospital. Sometimes she wished she could unlearn it. There was comfort in ignorance, in thinking the world a certain way and not knowing any different. Hatcher did not hear her speak, or didn't care to find out what that statement meant. He was driven by purpose, and that purpose did not include Alice's meandering thoughts. Then suddenly they were there. After all the years of dreaming of him, and waking to escape the memories, of hoping that he was only something she imagined, she had returned to the place where it all began. It was not very impressive. There was not even a structure above ground, only a flat, dirt-covered lot. Before it was a stone staircase that led down from the street to a door flanked by two men with no nonsense in their eyes. They made no movement indicating they cared about the presence of Alice and Hatcher near the top of the steps, but Alice was certain they had been noted. Of course, a rabbit would want a warren underground, Alice said. It is a warren. If I remember it right, Hatcher said. Lots of hallways, little rooms, places to get lost in. Yes, it is like that, Alice said, and her eyes widened. I remembered. Hatcher, I remember running through the hallways, bumping into people, men who tried to grab me, but I kept going because they couldn't hold me. They were so surprised. Why were they surprised? Hatcher said. Alice closed her eyes tight. She felt her old body again. That 16-year-old girl. Her legs hurt, and in between her legs, and she could hardly hold a breath in her lungs. Her cheek bled. She felt the hot, wet fall of it on her neck and shoulder and breast. Her dress was torn and flapped against her legs, and her feet were bare. But in her hand she gripped the knife he had so carelessly left to one side. On the end of the knife was a blue-green eye. I had his eye, she said, opening her own eyes again. It shocked people, even the hard soldiers. And I had so much blood on me, they weren't to know that it was almost all mine. He has men loyal to him, not like the walrus, not men who only want money or the chance to do violence, men who love him, though I don't understand why. They loved him, so they ran to him. That saved you, Hatcher said. They wanted to know if he lived. There was a lot of blood on my hand and on the knife, Alice said slowly. The knife was his. He always carried it. As soon as they saw it, They thought he was dead. His neck was arched back in his pleasure, and his eyes were closed. Her fingers closed around the hilt of the knife and arched around, and she stabbed him in the back over and over, and something hard and tough ripped under the blade. He opened his eyes, screaming, and she plunged the knife into the left one and pulled hard. There was blood all over, and he was still on top of her. She kicked and bucked until he was off, rolling on the mattress and holding his hand over his eye. He had another knife in his boot. He still wore his boots, and he slashed at her face as she rolled away on the floor. She scrambled to her feet, holding the knife in her hand, afraid to let it go, and he was screaming after her. Everyone was running toward him, and she ran away. Hands tried to hold her, but there was blood everywhere, and she was slippery with it. She kept running and running, turning and ducking and twisting, and then somehow she was out in the street, and they weren't following. She ran and ran and ran, and anyone who saw her turned away, for her face was wild, and she was coated with blood, and she was holding a knife with an eye on the end of it. She ran until she couldn't run anymore, until she was almost at the edge of the new city, and she dropped the rabbit's knife into the river. The water curled and steamed around it, so poisonous that it melted the blade and the hilt of the eye, and the eye, and then it was gone, and Alice lay down by the river and slept. You remember it all now, Hatcher said, and it wasn't a question. Yes, she said. She was beyond weeping for the child she once was. It is more or less what you would expect except for the part where I escaped. Nobody expected that. The door at the bottom of the steps opened, and a woman emerged. She spoke quietly to the soldiers, who disappeared inside. She was not the sort of woman Alice imagined seeing in a place like this. The girls who danced for hooting patrons in the Caterpillar's lair, that was the kind of woman she expected. This woman was hunched with age or care, and her hair was the color of Hatcher's eyes, gray like iron. She wore a gray shawl over a gray dress and walked in tiny steps. Altogether, she gave the impression of an oversized mouse, and when she lifted her gaze to Alice, her eyes glittered out of a narrow-lined face. Door? Alice said. Of all the things she'd seen, this shocked her the most. Her friend, her young and pretty friend, was gone forever. They were both 26, but Dor looked like a careworn grandmother. Her hands were knotted, with protruding blue veins. He said you would come back. He's been waiting. This morning he woke and he told me that today was the day his Alice would return. Dor said, her voice just as ancient as the rest of her and bitter. Always his Alice you are, despite what you did to him. Alice walked slowly down the steps. She lost her cap and her jacket, and the little knife she carried was visible in the rope looped around her waist. She looked like what she was, a very tall girl with a scar on her face and short hair, not disguised as a boy anymore. She towered above Dor, whose eyes flashed as she glared up at her old friend. "What right you have to be angry with me?" Alice asked. "You who tried to sell me as though I belonged to you. You who would have seen me eaten alive by a monster who wanted my magic." "You left me here," Dor said. "You escaped, but you left me here." "As you would have done to me," Alice said. She wished she could feel sorrow. She remembered playing with Dor from the time she was small, hiding behind her mother's rose bushes and giggling with secrets. This girl had been her constant companion. Why, after all this time? "That is what you say," Dor said. "Where is your anger?" "I'm not angry with you," Alice said. "I just wish to know why." It was true. She wasn't angry. Dor had been punished. There was nothing Alice could do to make it worse. "Why is a girl's question, and we are no longer girls," Dor said and turned away. "He's waiting." Just inside the door was a long, wide hallway. On each side were the rabbit's soldiers, standing at attention. Each held a weapon, a knife, or a sword, or an axe, and all of them watched Alice with eager, cruel eyes. They hated her, she realized, hated her for what she had done to their master. Dor had ensured that they knew who Alice was, and Alice was certain that they would also make sure she did not escape the rabbit's warren twice. Hatcher smiled when he saw the men waiting to cut them down. Dor shuffled ahead, her footsteps slow. Alice expected to be taken deep inside the rabbit's lair, into the maze that had nearly trapped her there before. But Dor led them to the end of the main hall, and inside they found the rabbit. Again, he was not as Alice expected. In her memory, he was strong and vital, his hands hard and bruising. This man could not have hurt her if he wanted. His left eye was covered with a gaudy gold patch decorated with emeralds and rubies. His body was shriveled, a memory of what he was once, and the large silk robe he wore could not hide this. He sat in a chair, just like a throne, in the center of the room. Alice was certain he could not move from it without help, and that it must have been her doing that made him so. When the knife plunged into his back, she had broken something that could not be repaired. His ears were, in fact, long and white, as was the hair on his head. The backs of his hands were also coated with white fluff. "Alice, my Alice," he said. "Pretty Alice." It wasn't even the same voice coming out of the same mouth. His face was heavily powdered, white as the hair and the ears. His one blue-green eye shone out of that pale face. This broken, shrunken creature was her nightmare? They were the only four in the room, and the door was shut. There was nothing but the chair and bare walls and floor, and the color was of fresh snow. "You've come back to me at last," he said. "And who is this you've brought with you?" "Nicholas? What happened to your ears?" Hatcher said. He couldn't seem to stop staring at them. They weren't like that before. "One of Cheshire's potions," the rabbit said. "He thought it would be amusing if I more closely resembled my name." The rabbit's tone told Alice that he did not find this as amusing as Cheshire. "Where's Jenny?" Hatcher said. "I thought you might want to discuss her," the rabbit said, looking crafty. "You broke your promise to me," Hatcher said. "I made no promise," the rabbit said. "You did. Now tell me where you sent her." "Her beauty is legendary," the rabbit said dreamily. "I have heard often from my friend in the East, and she has legions of admirers." "Tell me his name," Hatcher said. "No, I don't think so. But I will tell you hers. They call her Sahar, and he tells me it means the time just before dawn. For her hair is like the night before the sunrise, and her eyes as cool as the moon. Her name is Jenny." Hatcher said. "Not any more. I wish we had some tea and cakes. Wouldn't that be lovely, Alice? So we could all have a tea party, like we did so long ago." The rabbit was behaving like a grandfather meeting his wayward grandchildren for the first time in many years. He held out his hands to Alice, who frowned at him. I think you're confused about why we have come," she said. "Why, you've come to finish me off, have you not?" the rabbit said, and his eyes flashed. "Come to take vengeance for what was done to you, and Nicholas, I am certain, will ensure the job is done correctly. He has a way with axes." Alice stared at the rabbit, and then at Dor, who knelt at his side, with her head bowed like a supplicant. "You want me to kill you?" she said slowly. "No one else will do it. And you've been waiting for me to return. I expected you to come blazing in with a sword and a halo of golden hair like an avenging angel," the rabbit admitted. "Instead, you look rather underfed, and all your beautiful hair is gone. And you don't even have a sword with you at all. Where would I get a sword?" Alice asked. "You're an enterprising girl," the rabbit said. "If you want one, you would have it. Still, that knife you have will do the job nicely." He tilted his head back and showed his throat, which was powdered like his face. Alice approached him then, though she did not take the knife from her waist. He watched her, his remaining eye slitted. She reached out her hand and swiped her fingers down the side of his neck, brushing away the powder. All of his veins showed black underneath the skin, like crackling marble. Alice stepped back, staring. Her fingers felt burnt where they had touched him. Yes, he snarled, his face suddenly contorted with anger. Do you see what you have done to me? Do you see what you have wrought? You left me a half-alive thing, magicless and broken. And now it is only right that you finish it. Magicless? Alice asked. I took your magic. Of course you did, you stupid girl. That knife you stole was made by a magician, and it draws power from those like us. I've hidden my weakness from the others all these years, but now it can be over. No one else has the courage to free me. You deserve no such courtesy from me. Alice said faintly, though she hardly heard her own voice coming out of her mouth. All she could hear was, that knife you stole was made by a magician. The knife, Hatcher, the knife! Hatcher had his axe in his hand, ready to throw it. Which knife? The knife for the Jabberwocky. The magician's knife. Hatcher looked from Alice to the rabbit. That was the knife you used on his eye? She nodded. What happened to it? I threw it in the river and it melted. The rabbit stared at her. You threw a priceless magician's artifact into a stinking river? Yes. And now the Jabberwocky rampages through the city, and only the blade could stop him. The rabbit threw his head back again, and mirthless laughter poured forth. Then it matters not if you will have mercy on me, for we are all dead. Fear returned then, sweeping over her like the Jabberwocky's shadow. They'd had nothing to be afraid of as long as there was hope of that blade. But the hope was gone, disappeared in the river 10 years before, and none of them had known it. Not even the Jabberwocky. Why didn't he feel that his magic was destroyed? For that matter, why didn't I? My own power was inside that blade, and I never felt it lost. Perhaps the magic wasn't in the blade, he said, and his smile went very wide and dangerous. Perhaps it went into the one who used it. She saw his hope flare, a dangerous hope, the chance to recover what she had taken from him. Dor, the rabbit said, go and fetch Samuel and Gideon for me. Dor stood slowly, and it seemed to Alice that she was lost in a dream. She tilted her head at the rabbit, moved close to them, so that their faces nearly touched. Do you think you'll get your magic back from her? Dor asked. Yes, the rabbit said. Alice thought the rabbit assumed much. Hatcher would bury his axe in Dor's head before she crossed half the line of the room. If you do, what use would you have for me? Her voice was flat and expressionless. I would still need you, of course, my little dormouse, the rabbit said. You have cared for me all these years, kept my secret. If my power returns, you will be rewarded. He was salivating now, the taste of his magic practically on his tongue. He would promise anything, say anything, Alice knew, and Dora knew. She kissed him, and her arms went around his neck. No, Alice thought, not her arms, her hands. Once upon a time, it would have been impossible for Dora's little hands to surround his throat. Now, they just fit, and she was stronger than the rabbit, much stronger. His eyes bulged, and his hands drummed against the chair. Alice could see Dora's face, only her hands white with exertion. When she was done, she turned to Hatcher and Alice. There was no sadness or relief, only expectation. Goodbye, Dora, Alice said. Goodbye, Alice, Dora said. Hatcher swung his axe. And that is the end of chapter 17. Tune in next video to see what's going to happen with the blade and how are they going to be able to defeat the Jabberwocky now. Tune in next video. And as always, this has been Ruby, signing off.